We are live. So welcome everybody to something new for QRx. Instead of our typical quarterly webinar, we're going to do an episode of Mythbusters here from a quality and regulatory perspective. And as Mark said, we're hopefully going to have some fun with this and see if this format resonates. I don't know. I might show up in my next audit like this.
Yeah.
I
And
think
and
that'll
one of the
keep my
things I'll
clients
say is,
guessing.
yeah, one of the things I'll say is there's a lot of stuff out there that we could talk about with regard to, busting myths and stuff like that. We tried to keep ourselves focused on the quality management side of things. There's a lot more that we could explore from the regulatory side of things. And maybe that'll be just us in a future episode. If you do have suggestions or some things that you have questions about that we can bring to QRX Mythbusters here, as always, you can feel free to email us, connect to us through through our website, through our LinkedIn page, and so forth. And please do send any of those ideas that you have for us, that you want to take us. That's where the original MythBusters comes from, right? People bring things up that they're not sure about, or they've heard our myths, and they want to do the experiments. Um, on this one, we're pretty focused on things to bust because those are things that we focus on quite often as we do audits, as we do our consulting to help people understand what requirements exist out there. But we enjoyed things that people will say, an auditor told me I can't do this. And then we might be able to say, no, you can actually, and confirm that that's okay. So, all
Yeah, and I
right,
just want to
Steve.
do a little tie-in plug here, because this kind of concept of fighting the myths is also the basis for my Friday video series, Quality Heretic.
Yeah.
If you haven't checked that out, you should be following QRx Partners, and every Friday morning, you'll get to hear me rant a little bit and talk about things that we hear that we just know are people are not understanding correctly, or where over our years of experience, Mark and I have other thoughts. we, and I have to like invite you on to one of those videos, Mark, and we could do
Yeah.
two quality heretics together, right? And fight something in particular. But please check those out. I think you'll find those entertaining. They're quick. They're like somewhere between 5 and 9 minutes each. So all right, but with that said, let's talk about some quality myths. Now, you mentioned we might do regulatory in the future, but actually, I'm going to throw out there for our first myth today a regulatory topic.
Okay.
Um, and we do a lot of work with trying to guide people on, understanding what pathway are they going to be on with the FDA. And of course, you want the lowest possible classification because right, it should be easier. And of course, we hear this quite a bit. Well, get me down to class one because then I don't have to do a 510K, right? That's the easiest route. I just register and I'm good, right? And we're going to say, well, not really. It's like we wish it were that crystal clear. But if you look at the various product codes, you go to the FDA, product code database, and start hunting around, you suddenly start to realize that there are actually class one devices that do require 510Ks, as well as there are, five class two devices that are exempt from 510K.
And this really comes from, most people will say, even as we teach lots of times,
Mhm.
we'll say class one means you don't have to make a regulatory submission. Well, that that teaching phrase is not quite the truth. And so we'll go through how this myth, the things to look at as we talk about this
Yeah, I saw
first
I
myth.
saw an interesting post somebody was putting up there, and they were trying to simplify this whole thing. And they said, well, it's all based on risk. And so the first thing you need to do is figure out the risk of your device, and then that helps you determine your classification. I went, well, no, not exactly. Yes, class one is supposed to be lowest risk devices, and two is the medium, and three would be the highest risk devices. But again, there is some gray areas between those, right?
Because FDA has identified some substantial risks, that's why they want to see your technical documentation, that submission. They want to see your supporting information to make sure that you've done that so that they can allow you on the market.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times when I'm talking with clients and they're going, "What do you mean? I'm a class one, but I have to do a 510K. I've never heard of that before." So let's show an example out there. I would imagine everybody is familiar with one of these, hopefully, right? Twice a year, Well, hopefully not that particular device, because that's the actual drill as opposed to the cleaning tool. But it's the air powered, right,
Yeah.
handheld unit that the dentist uses.
This
I imagine you could probably get a cleaner on that
this
instead of
is
a
this
drill.
is what your dentist and hygienist use to scare the
Right.
bejesus out of you.
That
So
amazingly high pitched noise. And so, right, and you can look at this and go, I don't know, you're gonna use it to drill into people's teeth. I suppose that's pretty high risk, or at least moderate risk, right? But the reality is, if you go to the FDA product code database and pop that up, it actually, and we'll zoom in a little bit, is a class one device, right? So FDA is saying, no, we don't particularly see this as overly risky. And so it is class one, but it is a little bit risky. And if you look up, and I'll highlight it, you can see it does require a 510K. And so this is what's referred to as a class one reserved device. And FDA has created a list of these, and it's not like a small list. I'll throw this up. That's the actual listing. The idea is you're not supposed to be able to read it. I just want you to see how many class one devices actually require a 510K. There are lots of them. So getting the class one is not like a victory, there we go, we're all set. We're going to be on the market here in a couple of weeks. It depends, like in all things regulatory.
this is this is again one of those things where I mean many people want some sort of an absolute. All class ones don't require a submission. No, no, no. There,
Yeah.
there is very little in our industry that carries these absolutes. There's always the exceptions to the rule. There's always reasons behind these types of things, and an FDA will make sure that you're on the right pathway, and understand that you don't want them coming and say no, you need to make a submission. Steve, we've done quite a bit on the inadequate response series as well,
Mhm.
that outline what people think. If you're a class one product, you need to have a quality management system and an adequate quality management system with the processes outlined. And if you're one of these types of devices, you have to do a submission. So you're sending documentation in on a regular 510K the same way you would do for any other class two devices.
Right, which
No,
implies
no.
that you've identified a predicate. You're
Yep.
able to provide some. Now, what the advantage could be is if you're a class one reserved, FDA's expectations for clinical evidence might be lighter than a class two 510K, right? But it doesn't mean you're not going to produce any. And to your point, Mark, yeah, class one doesn't mean register and I can start selling. It's register and comply with 820 within the bounds of what you're, required to do. Sometimes you can be exempted from design control, but that's about it. Right? That doesn't mean no quality system. It just means I have a quality system and I don't have to do the design control pieces of it.
Yeah.
Right?
And this is another one of those things, Steve. I'll play with you just a little bit
Sure.
because you got the language of design control, which is from the QS reg. Okay. The new QMSR, of course, has 1345 language, which is design and
Design and
development.
development. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of these terminology shifts are going to take a while, right? I mean, even when I do my quality heretic stuff, and a number of those are on terminology, and I even catch myself using terms that we learned and used for decades. It's tough to make that shift. And so we'll probably continue to use that term design controls. I think everybody understands what that
Yeah.
refers to, but you're
Well,
right. It only appeared in the old version of 820,
well,
not in the
and and
standards.
and while we joke about it, I mean, this is maybe another myth to just throw in between here.
Yeah.
There is no need for you to use the terminology that's in the standard in the reg. You need to use the terminology that your organization understands and
Mhm.
make sure that the requirements are met when it comes to the regulation and the standard.
Yeah, it is a good example, right? If your SOP is titled design control, nobody's going to ping you because you didn't call it design and development. That's
No.
not a requirement. Yeah. So that's a good one. All
All
right. So I
right,
think with this one, I think we could say we busted this one.
for sure.
I don't see any questions. All right, we'll move on then to the next one. All
Yep.
right. So Mark and I love to talk about risk.
Oh, yeah.
Risk management, risk-based approach. And so this one's interesting because I see it a lot when I'm doing audits and trying to guide clients. This idea of a risk level matrix, and everybody's got one, and I'll show one in a second that you'll probably all recognize. But the myth is that the risk level matrix shows you one, whether risks are acceptable, and two, whether you've reduced risk as low as practical or as far as possible. What they're known as ALARP and AFAP. So let's take a quick look because I know everybody's got one of these,
For
right?
sure.
In your risk management procedure, you've got this.
This
And
is the
then usually
favorite.
what gets added to that is you name those zones.
Yeah,
And this I see a
these are
lot.
the favorite things to have.
Mhm.
And on top of having this in your organization, your R&D folks know what the numbers need to be so that they can get in green.
Yeah.
They've pre-decided that there's not going to be anything that's out of the green area or the low area when we get down to it. But we've pre-decided what do we need to do to put the risks in those areas because we know that's acceptable. Any other place is
Yeah, right.
we're not in happy land.
The SOP says if I can get into the green zone, it's acceptable. And then a lot of times this gets added to it.
Yeah.
That acceptable zone means that I don't have to do anything. No action is required. And in that yellow zone, as long as I can get that all the reds down to the yellows, then I've gone ALARP or AFAP, and life is good, right? And it's just those are actually not correct. Let's take a look at those. So a reminder, right? Risk is the combination of severity and probability. And then oftentimes, as Mark just alluded to, right, there's a scale, 1 to 5 or something scale, and you take a severity number and you multiply that by a probability number, and you get what's called an RPN or a risk priority number. That's all in
And not
caps because that word priority is the key to why you're doing that. Go
And
ahead.
us engineers make get ourselves feeling comfortable here because now it's got numbers to it, and I think I can do a calculation to show whether I don't need to do anything or not. So that engineering, mindset kind of breeds into the thinking on risk here. If I can get it down to a number that I don't have to do anything, then I'm good. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's
you're right. You're right. Engineers, we love a good formula because we like it gives us we pump in the variables and we get a number and life is excellent, right? It's all crystal clear. Nobody can argue with us then, right?
Yeah, then it's black and white because I did the calculation, and
And
what
my
we have to
chart
fo
says
yeah,
this is all I have to do, right? Why are you
and
telling me I'm not right?
yeah. So lots
So
of
if you
times, go ahead,
look
Steve.
at risk acceptability, right? Risk acceptability is based on the benefits outweighing the risks. That's what it means, right? It doesn't mean that the risk is gone because that's not always possible, or that you've reduced it. It's if you've reduced it enough so that the benefits of whatever it is you're working on and now outweigh those risks. Remember, RPN is just severity and probability. So where's benefit in that? It's not there. RPN has nothing to do with benefits and therefore can have nothing to do with risk acceptability. So you can't take your RPN and go, as long as I'm between these numbers, then I have an acceptable risk. And the same thing would happen with unacceptable, right? There's no really automatic unacceptable risks. Again, it comes down to the benefits. When I teach, I often use the example of an artificial heart valve. That's an inherently high risk device. And if you looked at the risk analyses that companies do for those, I'm going to guess a lot of those would still be in the red zone even after they're done applying all their risk controls. Yet they still got cleared or approved for the market, and millions of people get them every year. Why? Well, because if I don't get one, I die. If I get one, I might die in surgery, but I'm going to stay alive longer. The benefits outweigh the risks, right?
Yeah,
That's the kind of thinking that has to happen, not an RPN.
and often, Steve, here when we talk about benefits, well, I mean, many people focus on clinical benefits, right? The
Mhm.
benefits to
Yeah.
the patient. One of the pieces that I tell people often you have to also consider is there's a benefit to the practitioners, the clinicians as well, because if we do something to reduce the number of mistakes, and often I get clients and we'll talk through because a key aspect of usability or human factors
Mhm.
is that you have a risk analysis that goes along with that. And so if we can reduce errors, that also brings a benefit of specifically as we talk about changes and those types of things. We might make a change because we're adding benefits by reducing risk. In the end, reduce the risk to the patient, yes, but it's reducing risk of use error. Might be a reason to do a change, add a mitigation, those types of things, and that feeds into the acceptability of risk with this, right?
Yep. I'm just going to cycle my camera real quick because I got blurry for some reason. So I'm just going to
Okay.
come back. Oh, there's the real me. All right. Well, all right. I don't know why I went blurry there. Maybe the glasses are throwing it off. But so yeah, the other element to this then, right, is that I've also seen this where they use that rate matrix to decide whether they've gone as low as reasonably practical or as far as possible. Well, that's all about implementing risk controls that you've identified and then looking at your remaining options and saying, well, we could, but those are going to be disproportionate to the risk reduction achieved, right? That there's a, you kind of, I just had a brain fart there. The benefits are reducing as you go, right? So you could put a lot of effort into the next option, but it doesn't really reduce the risk all that much, right? And that's where you can say, well, then I think we've gone as far as possible, or that's as low as reasonably practicable. It would not be practical to spend millions of dollars on something that's barely going to move the probability of occurrence.
And we told you that we would keep you grounded within the standards or the regulations.
Mhm.
The previous one we showed the pieces out of the regulation that talk about, those class one devices that require submissions. Here we're talking about ISO 14971 for the requirements, but you need to also look at the TS 24971
Mhm.
to get to make some of these understandings and understand where we get this phrase disproportionate to the risk reduction achieved. That comes from that guidance document and the implementation. As we connect these things for you, where we're pulling these from is important because if you have somebody telling you you need to do further risk reduction, you need to have this phraseology and understanding, well, that's disproportionate to the risk reduction achieved. In other words, I can add another thing, but it doesn't move the needle
Mhm.
towards risk reduction, and it could add other risks now associated with it, which
Mhm.
makes that mitigation not really effective because if it adds more risks by adding that mitigation, then you're going to say no. I can't do that because it's adding more things. If it adds potential for use error, if it adds potential, the creating the ineffectivity of the treatment, those types of things, um, you want to make sure that you have phraseology, and this is one of the phrases that comes from that guidance document.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that provides really good context, when you look at the EU regulations, because a couple of versions ago of 14971, right, when the EU came back, I think it was 2012 when they did the EN version of
Correct.
14971, and they said, "Hey, we don't agree with the ALARP approach. We want you to reduce as far as possible." And now, when you look at the EU medical device regulations that replace the MDDs, that phraseology around reducing as far as possible or as low as possible is all over the place. And that created a lot of consternation going, so you're telling me I can't stop until there's no more options, right? And now I like that newest version of 14971, they kind of got in there and said, well, one, this idea of if it's disproportionate to the benefits, the reduction, then you don't have to do it. And the EU came along and agreed and said, yeah, and also if the only option left would be to change your intended use to reduce the benefits of the device, no, that isn't what we intend either, right?
Right.
So if your only option left would be to remove a feature that is actually part of the benefits of the device, then you've gone as far as possible, is the idea there. But
Correct.
again, the key here is when you think about an RPN or just combining severity and probability, where is any of what we just discussed in that formula? It's not there. So you can't use the RPN to decide whether you've achieved ALARP or AFAP. It just
Well,
isn't part of it.
and one of the big things that comes up with RPN is I get a threshold number. And we know thresholds can't be the answer. You can't get a below a number. One of the easiest ways to dispel that is you go the highest severity, maybe a five, and the lowest occurrence, a one or a two, and you get a five or a 10. That is clearly not the same as the lowest severity, one, and a probability of occurrence of a four or five. Um, it's clearly not the same.
Mhm.
So setting thresholds is already going to set you up for some imbalances in poor decision making. So RPNs just really can't be used to address that acceptability.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, right? So the bottom line is you're going after to understand these three things when you're doing risk management. That's the risk level, right? And again, those are estimates, right? Severity and probability. Even if you're doing a quantifiable version of probability, it's still an estimate. And that's a whole nother discussion about reliability of the data you use for that. But yeah, you're trying to figure out risk levels. Risk acceptability is ultimately what you're trying to demonstrate. And then ALARP and AFAP just tells you, how do you know you've done enough, right? So they are all separate. They're not, again, this is why the RPN doesn't become the grand unifying theory of risk management. It only addresses one of those three. You still have to do the other two in other ways, some of which you might be able to semi-quantify. The others, it's more just really good logic and making a good case for that. And I just want to remind everybody, right? So going back to our risk matrix, not that this is a horrible thing to have. It's just that the correct labels at best could be this. It's just the way, again, right? The P in RPN is for priority. This is how you do risk prioritization. If you think of it, I know everybody loves to use the term FMEA, which is not really, again, that's a whole nother discussion. But an FMEA-like tool is fine. But then you also hear FMECA, right? Failure modes, effects, and criticality analysis. Well, technically, that's what the priority tells you is how critical is this? Because if it's in my high zone, that sounds like a critical risk, right? So you could put that word in there. And I've seen people have a fourth zone for criticals, which is, you know, with the critical severity column overrides everything else. That's a do not pass go. But again, high, medium, or low, that's as much as an RPN or risk, matrix can tell you
And
about, one of those three things.
so we apply the risk-based approach to controls within the
Mhm.
risk management process,
Mhm.
right? And so what this is really telling you is if you're in the low category, I can do less documentation of the benefit outweighs the risk. Okay, in the medium area, I need to do a little bit more documentation, a little bit more statements, a little bit more support. If I'm in that high category, you really need to do some analysis and understanding, provide some additional, maybe clinical evidence or
I would
those
just say
types of
clinical
things.
evidence, expert, feedback or input. Yeah, right. But you're right. There's your risk-based approach. You can scale it. This can help. Again, this tells you that prioritization or the criticality. So then you can scale the expectations for how much work do I need to do to justify this, right? As a
Right,
residual risk, right? You do your initial analysis and then you figure out what controls. But at the end, right, your residual risk can still be high, but your device can still be safe, considered safe because the benefits outweigh the risk. It's just that it's more than just a statement, and I've seen that our device, we assume based on everything we've done, our benefits outweigh our risks. And it's like that sort of circular logic. Show me the evidence for that, right? If you still have some high residual risk. So,
right.
but in the end, I think we've busted that one as well. That's it.
Yeah,
Risk
and just
checking. Yeah.
again, keep in mind that what we're talking about here is your need to understand the benefit of your product and that the benefit outweighs the risk. That has to be done in every case in every category. Steve and I have been doing this a long time. We always give some practical examples. I've often given the example in Minnesota. It's easy to understand. Driving in the snow. If I just need to go out to the market and it's not really a critical thing, I'm probably not going to take that drive. If I need to go pick up my kid at school, I'm going to make that drive. Nothing changed with regard to the risk or the risk level.
The
It
hazardous
still is
situation
this,
was the same, right?
yeah. It is still the same. It just was the outcome or what needed to be achieved from that, and it clearly is different, and you need to take that into account.
All
Cool.
right. All right. I don't see anything in the Q&A yet, so
Yeah, we're
feel
up at the
free to
top of the
challenge
hour,
us or,
everybody. Yeah, we're at the top of the hour here.
that one may have
The
scared everybody because everybody's going, "Oh shoot, I have that in my risk management procedure."
yeah.
We've been doing that for years.
Yeah, we base
Uh-oh.
it on an RPN number and that kind of stuff. Um, as long as we're talking about this, Steve, can
Sure.
you bring that chart back up again just for a
Yeah.
second?
Mhm.
Okay, a different way to talk about this, people, is the low area. That low area is as low as possible, right? There's nothing underneath that, right? So you know that you're in that low area. You still do need to seek, if something comes up that could reduce risks that are in that area in severity or occurrence, you still would need to have to take that. I'm just not going to look there, right? And by definition, then that low area is outweighed by any benefit of the product. Okay.
As
And
long as you
so,
keep it sufficiently narrow, right? And I
yeah.
always talk about that. I've started to
Yep.
see, I just saw one the other day, somebody did one that I liked. It had a below low, it had a negligible layer,
Yeah.
right? That they can say, look, we're talking about numbers so low here that this is where we can say, yeah, it's automatic. The benefits are just,
But
because we're almost
I'm
at
just trying
zero,
to give you
but yeah.
some words to put around it when I say that you don't need to do as much documentation. It could be just you taking that look and doing that assessment. Look, this is in the lowest area already. The
Mhm.
benefits clearly outweigh risk in this low area. So that's my benefit risk statement. Okay. As I get into the medium, I need to do a little bit more, for this particular risk. We have done all of the risk reductions possible. It's as low as it can be. And the benefit of, this particular clinical benefit outweighs that particular risk. When you get in the high, again, you're going to do them individually in that formal testing, analysis,
Mhm.
going back and forth with your either medical director or clinical folks on what is the actual clinical benefit and what is the real probability of this particular clinical risk, and outlining those things. Again, that's some higher work. The reason that we don't say things like broadly acceptable, ALARP and intolerable,
Mhm.
is you do have the ability to accept the risk at whatever level it's at. That's why thresholds are not really a thing. There is no threshold that we either can't accept the risk or can accept the risk. We have to work to get it as low as possible and then make sure that the benefit outweighs that risk to accept it.
I would add to that, I would counter with that about, like on the unacceptable side. Again, you're supposed to understand the requirements, right? Which could be what is the market. And so it is possible that there could be certain risk levels where you just know your target market is not going to accept that, right?
Right.
And so, in which case, now you do sort of have an automatic, this is unacceptable, right? Unless you can change, right? Inherent safety by design is what kicks in there. Because otherwise, nobody's going to want this device. Or FDA's, we were just talking about this before we got on the call. I was recalling a submission last year that FDA rejected, where the clinical trials went just fine. But at the end of the day, FDA went, we're just not buying that the benefits outweigh the risks enough. Sure, your device is effective, but they said the risks you haven't really mitigated. And they said, look, we just, in good conscience can't approve this device because you haven't created a clear enough benefit risk, you know,
And,
differentiation there.
and keep in mind, this also then gets drawn into the post-market surveillance piece,
Mhm.
right? You're going to do confirmation of this, right? That people are actually receiving that benefit and that the risks are not higher than what you've predicted, right? So you need to do this through post-market surveillance and confirmation. This is again where a clinical study can come in because a clinical study, you're going to track adverse events or severe adverse events and then determine whether or not that risk is acceptable. for the benefit that's obtained, right?
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
All right,
All
rest.
right.
We can move on here. So that again,
Yep.
that's busted. That there's no magic RPN. There's no magic number that can get achieved. You have to do the benefit risk.
Yep. All right. All right. And our third and final myth is
Oh,
about another favorite
the
topic.
lovely topic of Kappa. Don't we love
Kappa, and
this?
I'm trying, that's one of those terms I'm trying to get out of my vocabulary, but it's just too convenient. But I'll talk about that in a second. So we hear this one quite a bit, or I just see it in practice in companies' procedures, where a Kappa requires that NCs be addressed by both corrective and preventive actions.
It's on their forms, right?
Yeah, it's
As you
built
go
right into
down,
the form. Yeah. First tell
yeah,
me about corrections, then tell me about corrective actions, now tell me the preventive actions. If you don't give me a preventive action, I'm going to boot this back to you, right?
you
So
can't have any blank areas on the form.
that's right. Yeah. NA was not an option here. So come on, it's called Kappa, right? And that's sort of the source of the problem. It was a very convenient acronym a long time ago. Um, and I hear people say, oh, it stands for corrective and preventive action. I go, no, that's not at all what it means, right? So that's an actually horrible acronym. The person who actually came up with it has even admitted it was the worst mistake of their career, and it's just taken on its own life over the decades. At best, you should look at it this way, right? Put a slash between them because it is corrective action, preventive action.
They are
Two
two separate
separate,
clauses with yeah, they're two separate
yeah.
clauses within the standard. They are not the same clause.
Exactly, right? And they are not even the same concept. The problem is the processes look very similar. They're almost like 90% the same. And so it seems convenient again to combine them together. But sorry, as a reminder, right, corrective action are those actions you take to prevent recurrence of an NC that's already occurred. I don't want it to happen again. How do I make sure it can't happen again? But preventive action is I don't have an NC yet. I have a potential for nonconformance, and I don't want to get there. How do I avoid getting there in the first place, right? And I think the problem is that the definition of corrective action uses the word prevent. I think that kind of messes with people's thinking, right? And then they connect the two all of a sudden.
For sure.
It's just you're preventing different things. One is preventing recurrence, the other is preventing occurrence.
So before we leave that, Steve,
Yeah.
one of the things that we need to emphasize with the QMSR, okay,
Mhm.
the QS reg didn't really have anything about something that we call correction. Okay, correction, containment, correction, fixing the problem, keeping it from going anywhere else is not within the context of the QS reg. The QMSR with 1345 now brings that correction term in directly in the standard. And so you need to make sure that ahead of this corrective action, um, that you do the appropriate containment and correction as well
Mhm.
to fix the problem. Particularly, the requirement outlines the need for a correction.
Yeah, and just
Okay,
to, wait for clarification, if anybody's not understanding what do we mean by correction, you let's say your nonconformance is you find a broken part, you fix it so that it's not broken anymore. That's a correction. Doesn't mean you're not going to break another one because you don't know why it was broken. You just know
right.
that it was broken, and so now I'm going to make it unbroken. Okay, great. But CA gets you to let's figure out what happened, why did it break, and let's make sure it can't break it again, right? And PA would have been before we even started building any, we would have analyzed our process and said, oh, if we do it that way, there's a good chance we're going to break a certain percentage of these. Can we change the process so that that isn't possible? That's preventive, right? Getting ahead of it. I'm just quick looking, Ivana, for
Yeah,
something in the Q&A
Ivona, we'll
here.
come back to that as we finish this up because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
more applicable as we go and we might address it.
But I
So keep
agree, it
going,
is
Steve.
painful to explain.
Yeah.
That is there. So again, right, you got to make sure you're thinking about these as two separate processes. And this is what I like too, right? Because I get a lot of argument that people go, well, wait, if I find a problem in one place and I act on it, and then I apply that same action somewhere else, over there where there was no problem, now it's a preventive action. And I was at a good talk and somebody talked about this exact scenario, right? Um, that let's say you have a facility, production facility, and you find a process that's non-conforming. And so, right, you take it through your, corrective action process, you analyze, you figure out the cause, you figure out what the right solution is so that it can't happen again. Whoops, wrong direction. And you implement a corrective action, right? So now you're going to prevent recurrence. All right, and then you go, well, wait a minute, we have another plant with the same operation at that plant. We haven't noticed any non-conformance, but now that we understand that it was a possibility, it's a possibility at that plant as well. So if the plant manager there goes, well, I'm going to implement that same action, do they get to take credit and say, but I was smarter, I did it as a preventive action? Hey. And a lot of the prevailing wisdom is yes, you get to pat yourself on the back and say, see, I was preventive. Those other guys, they were stupid and had to react. No, because the way you learned it within your overall quality system was because a non-conformance occurred, doing it somewhere else, which you should do, right, is still a corrective action. It doesn't become a preventive just because you didn't see the same results. And that would extend to you have similar let's say similar processes. And you go, oh, that root cause would apply over there as well, even though this is a molding operation and that's a blow molding operation, right? One's injection molding, the other blow molding. You go, there's still molding processes, and you go, it's corrective action to both because you found a non-conformance in
And
one.
this is really driven, Steve, by that need to fill the folder, right? I need to have something that I can call a preventive action. So when the auditor comes, I have something I can call a preventive action. Just resist that. There's no need to have a preventive action. You don't have to have something to show the auditor or inspector. It's an irrational need.
Yeah.
As long as you're showing the improvements through corrective actions, you're fine. Um,
I will add though, I mean, right, when I look through it and I go, all right, let me show me your kappa log and everything's a CA, there's no PAs listed. I'll usually come back to, right, because the thinking is changing, right? If you look at ISO 9000, 9001, right, there isn't even a section called preventive action anymore, right? It's now considered part of risk management and continual improvement. And so I'll usually just tongue in cheek go, so you haven't done any continual improvement projects that were based on the possibility that something could go wrong? They go, oh yeah, we do lots of those. Okay, those are preventive actions. You should take credit for those, right?
and again, we do it under the framework of continual improvement, right? Lean and Six Sigma projects often fall into this area,
Mhm.
right? That there's nothing happened. We're doing them for efficiency. We're doing them for error reduction, and but we haven't had this problem. Okay, that's fine. Take it. Again, people ask me all the time, well, what do I do about preventive action? And this is maybe goes to Ivona, your comment about arguing that you have to have a PA for every CA. No, you don't, because again, in the end, we look at the risk and we assess the risk and say, does the benefit of what we need to do outweigh that risk? That's risk management. Okay. That applies to these situations. So CA, corrective action, is a risk management. It's a mitigation. PA, you can look at your risk management file and look at all of the actions you've taken to prevent occurrence of an issue, right? Because that's what you did for reduction. You reduced the occurrence, okay, which means you're preventing occurrence, and use your risk management file as your PAs if they want to look at some. This is some of the things that I would say if you feel that need to have something in the folder, you can put something in that folder.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to because again, based on the term kappa, everybody writes a kappa procedure. They don't write a a corrective action procedure and have a separate either preventive action or build preventive action as a section of their quality planning and continual improvement procedure, if they even have one of
It,
those.
it and it really was this conversation that we're having here that was a driver of removing the preventive action clause from 9001 because it was driving this irrational thought that I needed to have a PA. Okay. The writers, the people that worked on 9001, 2015, really put a line in the sand and said, no, you don't. As long as you're doing corrective actions when necessary and you have continual improvement alongside that, you're covering everything. If you and then as you put the risk-based thinking in that, a risk-based approach, now you've got everything more than covered.
And going
And
back to
so
the
you,
QMSR, this is another piece, that people keep missing in all the discussions online about this. They keep focusing on that now 1345 is incorporated by reference. So is ISO 9000.
yeah,
FDA has incorporated that as well. So these concepts are there for the FDA because people saying, well, I'm going to be held to what 1345 says now. And the underlying foundational concepts in 9000 because that's in there as well. The FDA did acknowledge that, right? So let's not miss that these are not like, good ideas. They are now part of the regulation, essentially.
okay.
All right. Well, I think another one. Where is it? Busted on that one. So all three today were busted myths. Um, so let's see, Ivana. I don't know if there's something more you wanted us to get into. I
Yeah, and
agree, it can be hard to explain.
just as I look at that, Steve, and some of we did say some of the stuff. It's hard to explain to non-QARA people that PAs and CAs are two different things. Um, Again, focus on did something happen? If that something happened, wherever it happened, and I take some action based on that something happening, okay, there was an occurrence, then I'm simply preventing recurrence. Okay. If, because I've confirmed, and then that's the highest risk things because you've now confirmed that that can happen or did happen,
Mhm.
right? In preventive actions, you're preventing occurrence. Technically, it's still a theoretical thing. You've never proven that it can happen. Okay. And so if you have no example to point to say that it happened, then it's clearly preventive.
Yeah,
But
and that you just triggered something for me as it applies to doing evaluation of effectiveness. For PAs, it's a lot harder
of
because you're trying to
course,
prove that something that's never happened yet will never happen ever, right? And so what
well,
we
and
refer to as
we can
VOE,
talk about
evaluation of effectiveness, gets really difficult. Mhm.
and we can talk about one of the other big differences between the clauses of corrective action and preventive action. Corrective action has a requirement to take action without undue delay.
Mhm.
Okay, preventive action doesn't have that. Why? Well, if it's never happened, I don't know if it can actually happen, so
Mhm.
why do I have to worry about any delays? Okay. Whereas, again, corrective action, you've proven that it can happen, and now you need to take that action without undue delay. Now, again, people will argue with me about, or have a conversation about, well, that's not very well defined, undue delay. Well, it is because it's actually a legal term, comes up in the court of law as a very well defined term. Okay, you do an investigation in a timely manner. You didn't delay. You didn't wait for resources. You didn't. I mean, there's no excessive delays in there. You're just progressing and moving through it as quickly as you can. Okay, and then once you've completed your investigation and you define actions, how long those actions are going to take, any good plan will have due dates associated with it. If you keep extending that without any good reasons, then that's undue delay. If you're following the timeline that you outlined, then you're not undue delay. If your timeline is unreasonably long, okay, that's up to top management to understand the resources and everything necessary and push back on the timeline. Okay? And that's why we have all of these checks like kappa boards and all these types of things.
I just saw a warning letter and FDA pushed back basically from the undue delay perspective and said, we agree with your plan, but we don't understand why it's going to take you 4 months. They said that doesn't seem legitimate to us. So
Um,
they were looking at two
yeah.
great questions popped up in
Yep.
there. So let's go with Ashley Ann's first.
Sure.
So first, I'm going to get on my soapbox again about the term VOE, which does not exist. Okay.
Go watch The Quality Heretic from I
Yeah,
think it was
go
last
ahead with
week.
that. There is no such thing in the regulations of standard as VOE. It is evaluation of effectiveness that you're required to do. And I'll go back. A couple of my students, I think, are on here. Hopefully, they remember this. The difference between verification and validation, right? Verification is just did we do what we said we were going to do? Validation is did it work? So the V in VOE shouldn't be verification of effectiveness. Anything should be validation of effectiveness. But the standards and the regs don't use that word either. They use evaluate. So it's EOE. But anyway, to your point, yes, preventive actions also require evaluation of effectiveness. And that's what I was talking about. That could be a lot harder, right? Because nothing's happened yet. So how can I prove that something that hasn't happened now can't happen? And usually what it comes down to is that the effectiveness evaluation becomes part of your monitoring, right? You're
Right.
required to do process and product monitoring. And so now it becomes a new element of something you're monitoring. They're going, well, we're aware of that this was a potential thing, right? That could go wrong. We've taken these actions, hopefully now, so it can't. And now, as part of our monitoring, we're going to specifically make sure we're watching for that.
One of the things, Steve, that I'll add in here though is in that evaluation, often people just say, "Well, I'm going to wait 3 months and see if it shows up again." No, you have to do some testing to show that that is actually effective, that it actually did, and so if you can recreate the problem and show that your action prevents that problem from either escaping or being present, okay, then you can evaluate it. You don't have to wait a certain amount of time. Okay. You need to do that evaluation to say if it's good or not. Again, most things, most failures, you can show if it, show that it shows up or doesn't,
Yeah.
right? Turn it on, turn it off type of thing.
Yeah, and I think
Okay.
just one more point on the VOE for PA, and I think where companies get hung up on is they go, well, if that's true, if the only thing I can really do is monitor it because it's hard to define what that effectiveness evaluation would be, then how do I close the kappa? It's open forever, right? And I go, well, you could close the kappa based on implementation and then treat your for CAs, I would say yes, you would not close a kappa until your effectiveness has been evaluated. For preventive actions, again, since that's a separate process, you could define that you can close the PA report based on implementing and having proof that you have implemented the monitoring. And now the monitoring goes on forever, right? But you don't have to
And
keep
again,
the PA open forever.
I think what I would remind people, and you may or may not like this, Steve, because sometimes we don't agree on all of these things, right?
What?
But a design review by the appropriate people could be that evaluation of effectiveness. In other
Mhm,
words, I get somebody else that's independent of that
mhm,
to independently evaluate and give us your opinion. Is this going to address the issue if it were to come up?
mhm.
And they can say yes or no. Again, we like to use clinicians or other people that have that independent viewpoint and see if that causes a problem or not. Okay, we can move on to the next question there by Ivona.
Yeah, this one's a good one too. I have an opinion. Do you want to take it first, or should I share my opinion on that one?
You can go first.
Um, so no, that's not correct. Right. In order to figure out how am I going to head off this potential NC, I still need to understand the triggers. So I need to understand the causes. Otherwise, what am I acting on? So it doesn't matter whether it's an NC's already occurred or an NC's potential. I need to do my five whys or my Ishikawa or whatever tools I'm going to use to get back as far as I can in the causality chain so that neither situation can occur either in the first place or again.
Yeah, Steve, I suspect that one of the words you're avoiding is one of my pet peeves.
It
That
is.
whole the whole thing about root cause or RCA. You will notice that the standards, whether you're talking about 1345, 14971, any of those standards in risk management and all of it, will never use that terminology of root cause analysis. It will always talk about determining cause. And one of the things that I point out to our clients and stuff is that's because the standards writers realize that to avoid a problem, you can insert yourself anywhere in the sequence of events that cause that problem and prevent the problem from happening. Again, the point of corrective action is to prevent recurrence of the problem.
Mhm.
So if you can stop the sequence of events through inspection, through warnings, through advisories, through however you do it, okay, then you've stopped that recurrence, preventing recurrence,
And
okay,
my
or
counter,
preventing,
I have a different opinion, as you
yeah,
already alluded to, is that again, when you typically do your RCAs, right, you find
yeah,
multiple pathways. And to my point, if you don't get far enough back, you still allow for other triggers to be there.
for
So
for
maybe you showed
sure,
one method of it occurring, but not
yeah,
others, right?
and
But
and
the probabilities
obviously
could be different. And
you're
so,
working to reduce the risk as far as possible.
mhm,
So the farther you can get down that chain, the more failures you will prevent, right? Because for every possibility that it branches. This is why Ishikawa is also a good tool to use because those things branch out. So the
mhm.
farther I can get down in the branch, the more effective I will be at preventing problems.
Right. But to your
Okay.
point, yes, you're not required to go that far, but I just think it makes sense. So I tend to push for that. Then we got a question about in an EQMS. All right. So, Ashley, and my view of that is Mark and I see a lot of EQMSs. We have partnerships with a number of those companies, and we often tell them what they're getting wrong. They are not necessarily implementing correctly. And I know they'll have a Kappa module because that's what everybody expects to see. The same way, this is another topic Mark loves. They all have a training module, even though training is not an actual requirement. Nobody has a competency model. That a module. That's the actual requirement. So yeah, I get it. Your EQMS might stand in your way of how do I close out a PA because it's configured to require me to provide proof of effectiveness, which under a PA may not ever come. Best we can do is monitor. There are ways to kind of say, here's my monitoring plan or my update to my monitoring plan, and that will serve as closing out the kappa,
This
in the EQMS.
this is
So there
why
are
I
ways
su
to provide some sort of evidence and say we're going to move on, and now it becomes part of our quality planning and management review process.
but I would also this is why I advocate for our clients to create something called Kappa board. Okay, and then you can have meeting minutes for the Kappa board.
Hmm.
And one of the items that you might cover in that Kappa board would be to say, well, these items were closed in the last month, the last quarter, whatever you want to call it, and they have not recurred. So then you can say, yeah, we're effective. Okay. Or the opposite could happen.
Mhm.
Okay. We took this corrective action and hey, this looks like it recurred. Do we want to reopen or initiate a new one based on that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's where you can use Kappa board and these other processes to create a methodology for verifying and evaluating that effectiveness of the actions being taken. So hopefully that helps, Ashley.
Yeah, and again, coming up with the evaluations of effectiveness, it all comes down to confidence. Right? And you have to kind of take a statistician's view of this and go, what's our confidence level that what we've seen should indicate that we've been
Yeah.
successful, right? Because
One,
you can't necessarily be absolute, as we've talked about here.
because I add to that, because one of the mistakes that happens with any meetings that we have is our failure to take meeting minutes. That's why I like things like the tool that we have recording here or the AI tools that can help you take notes because they can record those things, help you record those things and make the appropriate meeting minutes to document what happened. And
Mhm.
so now you have something that can be used as audit evidence to show your auditors or inspectors, yeah, we actually do that on a regular basis, and here's where we record it and keep track of it so that because Kappa board usually involves at least one member of top management, and then your process should review, right? In management review, you're going to say, is Kappa board effective? Right? Is to show that your quality management system overall is suitable, adequate, and effective. Okay, so we have all of these processes in place. So connect them all.
All right. Well, we are just about at the end. We got 3 minutes. Any other final thoughts, questions, challenges?
Yeah, it's been all Ivona and Ashley Ann. We
Should I
appreciate
should I
that.
should I keep the mustache?
I think so. I think you should take that to your teaching at St. Cloud State, Steve.
I was thinking the same thing. That would freak them out if I showed up
Again,
looking like this.
as we close up here, I'll remind everybody, there's these topics that exist out there with um, that people will say this, and Steve and I will get that kind of sideways look and go, I'm not sure about that. Those are the things that we would like to have you suggest to us as we look at other episodes of Mythbusters that we can take on. Steve, I think, just alluded to one of them. I love to take on the training thing. That we can bust that myth that training is a requirement. It is not, and those types of things, and we'll talk about that in another episode. But if you have anything, um, that's what we love to do is answer people's questions and help resolve them. I get other questions informally as well through email. So you can connect to us in LinkedIn. You can message us, and most people will tell you that Steve and I are very open to responding to those things. And then we'll have some more fodder, so to speak, for Mythbusters.
Yeah, please. I mean, for the Quality Heretic series, we're always looking for, yeah, what is it at the top of people's minds, right? It doesn't have to necessarily come out of our heads. We want to know what you guys are concerned with and going, hey, I'm seeing this trend out there. Could you guys talk about this in a future episode of either of those? And we will definitely get that somewhere into the schedule. So, I guess I just want to ask, whether you guys like this format. Did this work? We can get like a thumbs up or claps or something for people if they liked it. If this was a good departure from our normal approach to the webinars.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll hit any copyright issues with this if we keep going, but we could change the logo so it's not actually their logo and keep the
But
concept.
we give appropriate credit to them. I think,
Yeah.
these are the types of things that people they want some questions answered, and this is a great format to do that in.
And we didn't
Um,
charge for it, so it's not like we're making money off of their
yeah.
likeness and we're
So
great.
and it's from Mark Jamie Swanson and I'm sorry, it's Steve Jamie Gompertz and Mark Adam Swanson. Um, so if I mess it up, then we can't really be tagged for the um
You know
any
what's funny
copyright
about
thing.
that? Our middle initials still work.
Yeah,
Our,
yeah.
our real middle initials actually match with our pseudonyms here. So, well,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. And go forth and be bold, right? And do the right things.
And as always, email or connect with us if you have questions. Good luck, everybody.
Yep. Have a good day.